The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and broken dreams. Olivia Barnes clutched her phone with trembling fingers as she stood outside the intensive care unit. Through the glass window, she could see her younger brother Daniel lying motionless on the white bed, machines monitoring his every breath. The car accident had been sudden and brutal, leaving the 19-year-old in critical condition. A doctor approached with a grave expression. His words cut through her like ice water. The surgery Daniel needed would cost $200,000, and their modest insurance covered only a fraction. Olivia felt the world tilt beneath her feet. As an art teacher at a small community school, she earned just enough to cover her own modest expenses. This amount might as well have been $2 million. She walked to the hospital chapel, not because she was particularly religious, but because she needed somewhere quiet to think. The wooden pews offered little comfort as she buried her face in her hands. Olivia had raised Daniel after their parents died 5 years ago in a plane crash. She had been 21 then, suddenly responsible for a grieving 14-year-old. They had survived together, built a small but happy life. Now she was failing him when he needed her most. An unlikely proposition. The next morning, Olivia received an unexpected call from Morrison and Associates, a prestigious law firm she had never heard of. The secretary insisted she come to their downtown office immediately regarding a matter of urgent importance. Confused but desperate for any possibility of help, Olivia took a taxi she could not afford to the gleaming skyscraper that housed the firm. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt like ascending to another world. The law office was all marble floors and leather furniture, the kind of place where people discussed millions as casually as Olivia discussed groceries. A well-dressed assistant led her to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Then he walked in, and Olivia forgot how to breathe. Trevor Ashford moved with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. He was tall, with dark hair styled perfectly, and eyes the color of storm clouds. His charcoal suit probably cost more than her car. Everything about him screamed power and wealth, from his platinum watch to the way he commanded the space simply by entering it. His gaze swept over her with clinical assessment, taking in her simple cotton dress and worn shoes. Olivia felt herself being catalogued and found wanting. She lifted her chin, refusing to be intimidated despite the knot of anxiety in her stomach. Trevor sat across from her without preamble. His lawyer, an older man named Patterson, placed a thick document between them. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Trevor finally spoke, his voice deep and carefully controlled. The cold contract, he explained his situation with the emotional detachment of someone reading a grocery list. Richard Ashford, his father, controlled one of the largest real estate empires in the country. The old man believed Trevor, at 32, was too focused on business and needed stability. Richard had given his son an ultimatum: marry within 3 months or lose his position as heir to the company Trevor had helped build. Trevor had no interest in love or traditional marriage. He had seen too many relationships destroyed by greed and manipulation. What he needed was a business arrangement, someone who would play the role of devoted wife in public while maintaining complete independence in private. The marriage would last 1 year, after which they would divorce quietly and both walk away with what they needed. Olivia listened with growing disbelief as Patterson outlined the terms. Trevor would pay her $300,000 immediately upon signing the contract. After 1 year, she would receive another $200,000. In exchange, she would live in his home, attend social functions as his wife, and maintain the appearance of a happy marriage. Her mind raced through calculations. $300,000 would cover Daniel's surgery and rehabilitation. The additional amount would secure his future, pay for his college education, give him the life he deserved. It was more money than she could earn in 10 years of teaching, but the cost felt enormous in ways that had nothing to do with money. This man was asking her to pretend, to lie, to treat marriage as a transaction. Everything her parents had taught her about love and commitment would be violated. Trevor watched her internal struggle with an impassive expression. He had done his research thoroughly. Olivia Barnes was 26, unmarried, no boyfriend, devoted to her brother, and currently facing a medical crisis she could not afford. She was also unremarkably ordinary, which suited his purposes perfectly. No social climbing ambitions, no connections to exploit, no reason to complicate things with actual emotions. The reluctant yes Olivia looked at the contract, then at Trevor's cold, handsome face. She thought about Daniel lying in that hospital bed, his future hanging by a thread. She thought about her parents and the love they had shared, the example they had set. They would be horrified by what she was considering, but they were gone, and Daniel needed her now. Her hand shook as she picked up the pen Patterson offered. Trevor leaned back in his chair, watching her with those storm-gray eyes that revealed nothing. In that moment, Olivia Barnes made a choice that would change everything. She signed her name at the bottom of the contract, selling herself into a loveless marriage to save the person she loved most. Trevor's expression did not change as he added his own signature. Patterson witnessed the document, and just like that, Olivia's fate was sealed. The lawyer explained they would marry in 1 week at the courthouse. Simple, quick, efficient. Nothing romantic or sentimental. Just a legal formality. As Olivia left the office with a certified check in her trembling hands, she did not look back at the man who would soon be her husband. Trevor stood at the window, watching the city below, already compartmentalizing this development into his carefully ordered life. Neither of them could have predicted that this cold, calculated arrangement would become the greatest test of their hearts. Neither understood that sometimes love appears not in spite of impossible circumstances, but because of them. The contract was signed, the terms were clear, but the human heart follows no rules written on paper. Their story had begun. The Ashford mansion stood like a fortress on the hillside, its stone facade catching the afternoon light as Olivia's taxi pulled through the iron gates. She carried only 2 suitcases containing everything she owned that mattered. The wedding had taken place 3 days ago at the courthouse, a sterile 15-minute ceremony with Patterson and his secretary as witnesses. Trevor had shaken her hand afterward like they had just closed a business deal, then disappeared into a waiting car. Grace, the housekeeper who had worked for the Ashford family for 20 years, greeted Olivia at the entrance with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. The older woman showed her through rooms that could have housed entire families, past artwork worth fortunes, finally arriving at a bedroom suite larger than Olivia's entire apartment had been. Trevor's room was at the opposite end of the long hallway. Grace explained this matter-of-factly, as if separate bedrooms for newlyweds were perfectly normal. Olivia unpacked her modest belongings into a closet designed for someone with 10 times as many clothes, feeling like a child playing dress-up in adult spaces. That first dinner was excruciating. They sat at opposite ends of a table built for 12, the silence broken only by the quiet clink of silverware against china. Trevor focused on his phone, responding to emails between bites. Olivia tried to eat the gourmet meal Grace had prepared, but everything tasted like cardboard in her mouth. After 3 days of this painful distance, Olivia decided she could not live like a ghost in this beautiful house. She woke early one morning and went to the kitchen, determined to do something normal. Grace found her making pancakes, flour dusting her nose, humming softly to herself. The housekeeper smiled with genuine warmth. This kitchen had not seen homemade breakfast in years, not since Trevor's mother had died when he was young. The 2 women fell into easy conversation, and Olivia learned about the lonely boy Trevor had been, desperate for affection but learning to build walls instead. Cracks in the armor Trevor smelled the pancakes from his office and found himself drawn downstairs despite his intention to skip breakfast. He paused in the kitchen doorway, watching Olivia flip pancakes while chatting animatedly with Grace. She wore simple jeans and a yellow sweater, her auburn hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. There was something warm and alive about the scene that made his chest feel tight. Olivia turned and spotted him, her smile faltering slightly. She offered him pancakes with an uncertainty that made him feel like a villain in his own home. Trevor accepted, surprising himself, and sat at the small kitchen table rather than the formal dining room. The pancakes were good, made with care rather than chef-trained precision. Olivia asked about his work, and Trevor found himself actually explaining a complex property development deal. She listened with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions that showed she was really trying to understand his world. Over the next 2 weeks, small changes rippled through the mansion. Olivia brought fresh flowers from the garden for the main rooms. She convinced Grace to teach her family recipes. She played classical music on the grand piano in the library, filling empty spaces with sound. The house began to feel less like a museum and more like a home. Trevor noticed everything while pretending not to. He noticed how Olivia visited Daniel at the hospital every day, reading to him during his recovery. He noticed how she thanked every staff member by name, treating them like people rather than servants. He noticed the books she read, the way she bit her lip when concentrating, the soft humming when she thought she was alone. One evening, Trevor came home late to find Olivia in the library, tears streaming down her face as she stared at a photo album. Before he could retreat, she looked up, embarrassment flooding her features. The album contained pictures of her parents, memories of the family she had lost. Something in Trevor's chest cracked open. He sat beside her without speaking, and Olivia found herself telling him everything. About parents who had loved deeply and laughed often, about becoming a parent to her brother overnight, about the crushing weight of responsibility and the fear that she was failing. Trevor listened with an intensity he usually reserved for business negotiations. When she finished, he did something that surprised them both. He retrieved his own photo album, dusty from years of neglect, and showed her pictures of his mother, a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, who had made his childhood bearable before cancer stole her away. The dinner disruption Richard Ashford summoned them to dinner 2 weeks after the wedding. His penthouse overlooked the city like a throne room, cold and imposing. The old man studied Olivia with calculating eyes, clearly looking for weakness. For proof, this marriage was the sham he suspected. Olivia wore a simple navy dress Trevor had bought for her, feeling desperately out of place among the designer gowns and expensive jewelry. Richard's questions were sharp, designed to expose her inadequacy. Where had she attended university? What did her family do? How had she met Trevor? She answered honestly, refusing to be ashamed of her modest background. Trevor watched his father's interrogation with growing tension, his jaw tight. Then Vanessa Hunt arrived, fashionably late and devastatingly beautiful in crimson silk. She had been Trevor's girlfriend for 18 months before he discovered she was feeding confidential information to his competitors. The breakup had been brutal and public. Vanessa kissed Richard's cheek with familiar affection, then turned her cold smile on Olivia. Her words dripped with false sweetness as she reminisced about intimate memories with Trevor, clearly trying to establish dominance and humiliate the new wife. Olivia felt her face burn with embarrassment, but she held her composure. What shattered her was not Vanessa's cruelty, but the implications of those shared memories. Trevor had loved someone once, had been vulnerable with someone, and that someone was this perfectly polished woman who made Olivia feel like a child playing pretend. When Vanessa suggested that Trevor must miss being with someone who actually understood his world, something inside Trevor snapped, the defense. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against marble. The temperature in the room seemed to drop as Trevor fixed Vanessa with a look that could freeze fire. His voice came out low and dangerous, carrying the weight of someone accustomed to destroying obstacles. Trevor reminded everyone present exactly why Vanessa was no longer in his life. He detailed her betrayal with cold precision, watching her perfect facade crack. Then he did something that shocked the entire table. He reached for Olivia's hand, his fingers warm and strong around hers, and spoke with quiet conviction. He told his father that Olivia was more genuine in one day than anyone else Trevor had known in years. That her kindness was not weakness but strength. That her ordinary background was refreshing in a world of artificial social climbing. That he considered himself fortunate, not desperate. The words were part of their act, Olivia knew. Necessary performance for his father. But something in Trevor's eyes when he looked at her felt dangerously real. His thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand, a gesture too tender for their contract. Vanessa left shortly after, her dignity in tatters. Richard watched the exchange with shrewd calculation, and Olivia worried they had revealed too much or not enough. The evening ended in tense silence, the midnight revelation. That night, Olivia could not sleep. She found Trevor on the terrace, staring at the city lights below. The autumn air was cool, carrying the scent of night-blooming jasmine. He had removed his jacket and tie, looking more human than she had ever seen him. "Thank you," she said softly, "for defending me tonight. You did not have to be so convincing." Trevor turned to face her, and in the moonlight his expression was unguarded. Maybe I was not trying to be convincing. Maybe I meant it. The air between them charged with electricity. Olivia's heart hammered against her ribs as Trevor stepped closer. She could see the conflict in his storm-gray eyes, the war between what he had promised himself and what he was beginning to feel. He told her then about his childhood, about a mother who died too young and a father who saw affection as manipulation, about boarding schools that taught him to need nothing from anyone, about Vanessa and others who wanted his money but never him. Olivia listened, understanding now why he had built such high walls. She shared her own fears, about failing Daniel, about never being enough, about pretending to be someone's wife while forgetting how to be herself. They talked until dawn painted the sky pink and gold. Somewhere in those quiet hours, something shifted between them. The contract was still there, the terms unchanged. But beneath the business arrangement, something real and terrifying was beginning to grow. Neither spoke of it as they finally went to their separate rooms. But both knew that the walls between them were crumbling, one honest conversation at a time. 6 weeks into their marriage, Trevor Ashford finally admitted to himself what Grace had seen from the beginning. He was falling in love with his contract wife. It happened in small moments that accumulated like snowflakes building an avalanche. The way Olivia left notes on his coffee mug each morning with silly drawings that made him smile during stressful meetings. How she convinced him to take actual lunch breaks, bringing sandwiches to his office and refusing to leave until he ate. The evening she fell asleep reading on the library couch, and he carried her to bed, feeling her trust as she curled into his arms without waking. Daniel was recovering beautifully, and Olivia brought him to the mansion for Sunday dinners. Trevor found himself enjoying the teenager's presence, teaching him chess and discussing college plans. He caught himself imagining this as his real family, not a temporary arrangement with an expiration date. The realization terrified him. In 8 months, Olivia would take her money and leave. That was the deal. Trevor had built his entire adult life on control, on knowing exactly what to expect. Love was chaos, vulnerability, the potential for devastating loss. He had sworn never to open himself to that pain again. Yet here he was, lying awake at night thinking about auburn hair and hazel eyes, inventing excuses to be near her, feeling jealous when the gardener made her laugh. He was breaking his own rules, and the worst part was not wanting to stop. The scandal breaks. The media explosion happened on a Tuesday morning. Trevor arrived at his office to find his phone flooded with calls and his assistant looking pale. Someone had leaked the marriage contract to a tabloid journalist. Every humiliating detail was now public knowledge. The financial arrangement, the 1-year timeline, the clause about maintaining appearances. The headlines were brutal. Millionaire buys wife in cold contract. Real estate mogul's fake marriage exposed. Love for sale. The Ashford arrangement. Trevor's hands shook as he read the articles, seeing their private agreement dissected and sensationalized. Photographs of Olivia accompanied the stories, descriptions of her as a gold digger who had manipulated a vulnerable man. None of it was true, but truth rarely mattered once scandal spread. He called her immediately, but Olivia had already seen the news. Her voice was small and broken when she answered. Reporters were camped outside the mansion gates. Her school had called asking if she planned to continue teaching. Daniel's hospital had journalists trying to interview patients and staff. Trevor drove home faster than he should have. his mind racing through legal options and damage control strategies. But when he burst through the front door and saw Olivia standing in the foyer with tears streaming down her face, all his careful plans evaporated. She had her suitcases packed. The painful decision. Olivia had spent the morning making the hardest choice of her life. She loved Trevor Ashford. Somewhere between pancakes and midnight conversations, between his rare smiles and the gentleness he showed only her, she had fallen completely and hopelessly in love with a man who had never promised her anything real. The contract had been clear from the beginning. This was temporary, transactional, safe, except her heart had not followed those rules. Every touch, every shared glance, every moment of unexpected tenderness had woven itself into her soul until she could not imagine life without him. But now she was destroying him. The scandal was hurting his business, his reputation, his relationship with his father. Clients were questioning his judgment. Board members were calling for explanations. And Olivia knew that her presence made everything worse. She had to leave. Not in 8 months when the contract ended, but now, immediately, before she caused more damage to the man she loved. Trevor stood frozen as she explained her reasoning, her voice steady despite the tears. She would return his money. She would give a press conference taking full responsibility. She would disappear from his life as cleanly as possible. What she did not say, could not say, was that leaving him would tear her apart. That these weeks had been the happiest of her life. That she had started imagining a future where the contract did not matter because what they shared was real. The confession Trevor listened to her careful, logical explanation, watching the woman he loved prepare to walk out of his life. Something inside him shattered and rebuilt itself in the space of a heartbeat. He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, his hands cupping her face with a tenderness that stole her breath. His storm-gray eyes burned with an intensity that made her knees weak. Then he said the words that changed everything. He loved her. Not as a contract wife, not as a convenient arrangement, but as Olivia, the woman who brought warmth into his cold house, who made him laugh and challenged his assumptions and showed him that vulnerability was not weakness, but courage, who loved her brother fiercely and treated his staff with kindness and looked at him like he was more than his bank account. Trevor apologized for taking so long to say it, for being too afraid to risk his heart again. He told her that the contract had been his way of controlling something that could never be controlled. That love was supposed to be terrifying and messy and completely worth it. Olivia sobbed against his chest as years of walls crumbled for both of them. She confessed her own love, admitting she had signed that contract for Daniel but stayed for Trevor. That every day with him had been a gift she never expected. They stood in the foyer holding each other while cameras flashed outside the gates and the world judged them. None of it mattered anymore because they had found something infinitely more valuable than contracts or reputations. They had found each other, facing the father Richard. Ashford arrived at the mansion that evening, his expression carved from granite. He had seen the scandal, read every damaging headline, and come to deliver consequences. Trevor met his father in the study, and for the first time in his adult life, he did not care about the inheritance or the company position. Olivia stood beside him, their hands intertwined, presenting a united front. Richard began his prepared speech about disappointment and poor judgment. But Trevor interrupted with quiet strength. He explained that yes, the marriage had started as an arrangement, that he had been cynical and afraid, using a contract to avoid genuine connection. Then he told his father the truth, that Olivia had taught him what real love looked like, that she had asked for nothing except kindness and given him everything he had been missing, that if choosing her meant losing his inheritance, then the choice was simple. Richard studied them both with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. He saw how his son stood taller with this woman beside him, how Olivia looked at Trevor with devotion that could not be faked, how they protected each other instinctively. The old man surprised them both by sitting down heavily, his stern facade cracking. He told them about Trevor's mother, about a love that had transformed his own life, how losing her had made him hard, and how that hardness had damaged his son. Richard had suspected the marriage was arranged. He had pushed Trevor toward it, hoping that proximity might create something genuine. The contract was unfortunate, but what mattered now was whether they wanted to continue. The new beginning. 3 months later, Trevor and Olivia stood in the mansion's garden, surrounded by everyone who mattered. Daniel walked Olivia down the aisle, his recovery complete, grinning at his sister's happiness. Grace cried happy tears from the front row. Even Richard Ashford smiled genuinely as his son exchanged vows that were real this time. There was no contract this time, only promises made freely between two people who had found love in the most unexpected place. Olivia wore a simple white dress and carried wildflowers from the garden. Trevor could not stop smiling, his hand trembling slightly as he slipped a ring onto her finger. Not the cold business arrangement from months ago, but a symbol of forever. When he kissed her, the gathered guests cheered. But Trevor and Olivia barely heard them, lost in each other and the remarkable journey that had brought them here. That night, as they danced under strings of lights in the garden, Olivia whispered against Trevor's chest. She thanked him for seeing her true worth, for taking a chance on something neither of them planned. Trevor pulled her closer, breathing in the jasmine scent of her hair. He told her the truth he now understood completely. She had always been worthy. He had just needed to break through his own fears to recognize it. Their story had started with signatures on paper, with money and obligations and careful distance. But it became something neither contract nor scandal could touch. It became the kind of love that transforms, that heals old wounds, that proves the human heart knows wisdom no legal document can capture. Trevor Ashford had tried to control everything, to protect himself with walls and rules and transactional relationships. But Olivia Barnes had shown him that the greatest risk brings the greatest reward, that sometimes you have to break your own rules to find what you really need. They had both been broken in different ways. The marriage contract had brought them together, but love had made them whole, and they lived the rest of their days proving that sometimes the best love stories begin with the worst circumstances, and that true worth cannot be measured in contracts or money, only in the quiet moments when two hearts finally recognize they have found home. The end.